All right, who wants to talk about how EIP 4844 is going to lower transaction fees so that we can scale Ethereum to the world?
Yeah. I mean, yes, but David, I feel like there's something more fun for us to discuss here today.
Who wants to talk about EIP 1337 and account abstraction and how it's going to make wallet UX better so we can all use Ethereum?
There's some hands.
It's all wrong answers. The answer to what we're going to need to drive a bull market, again, is going to be the same answer as to why we had a bull market in 2021. And that was culture. No one gives a shit about all the things that we give a shit about in this room. We're a bunch of nerds. And so we care about certain things that are not going to scale. What ended up happening in 2021 was that Ethereum and the crypto world figured out that culture is actually the thing that drives mainstream adoption. And so while there's going to be a bunch of technical stuff that we're going to talk about at DEF CON, the developers convention, if we're actually going to scale this thing out, we need to emphasize the cultural aspects that Ethereum drives in this world. And I think this is why DEF CON is actually so cool. It's because it's a developers convention, it's a tech conference, but we're here in Colombia experiencing the Colombian culture and seeing how Web3 can help the world. And it's not just a tech conference, it's also a cultural conference. And so with that rant out of the way, I want to ask about what we're doing here with Lens and what we're doing here with Disco, and what we also need to do in Web3 to actually have this stuff be cared about by all the non-nerds in the world. And so, Evin, after I shut up, what thoughts come to mind about all that for you?
Great setup, David. Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to thank Livepeer for hosting today. Thank you guys all so much for taking time out of your morning to come hang with us and talk about vibes and fun and culture. So the first thing that occurs to me is thinking about all of the ways that we find delight with connected products in our lives outside of Web3. Whether that's using applications, whether that's going to parties that have digital tickets, whether that's spending time in game environments, watching content, engaging in all kinds of co-creation, building things together. Since the dawn of humanity, human beings have just sought vibes, trying to do cool stuff with their friends and find psychological safety and belonging and delight. And right now, that experience is challenging in Web3 because most of our Web3 and connected applications are predicated on financial interactions, public data, the ability to express yourself in a way where everyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection is going to be able to see you. And so the feeling of belonging, the sense of delight and understanding is still a little bit far out of our reach because we are centering around technology, not around people. But we are in a fortunate position right now to be able to change that.
And Stani, with what you're up to at Lens and also just what you think about with future development as a developer, as an app developer, how is Lens different from everything that's come before in the crypto space? And what's it really optimizing for beyond DeFi yields and NFTs and stuff like that? What attracts people to Lens that DeFi and NFTs hasn't brought people in before?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things that Lens
Guys, can we have some help with the mics, please?
Maybe share.
So she's well. I don't know if I can say that. Yeah, so I think with Lens Protocol and what a lot of Web3 is doing is providing ownership. So with Lens Protocol, you can actually own your social presence and your social graph, your connectivity. And the way I see it, what we have built before in the space is that we built this interesting financial infrastructure, which is kind of part of the narrative of, let's say, Bitcoin and solving peer-to-peer transactions and getting the middleman out of the equation. And that's the outcome has been like a global marketplace where anyone can participate and it's borderless, and that's decentralized finance. But what I see more valuable is actually what David and Evin was mentioning about the culture part. So we actually, all people have more value in social capital. So one of the things in decentralized finance that isn't necessarily working well is that you really can't use DeFi unless you have some sort of capital. But everyone, any single person in the planet has certain type of social capital, and that social capital is actually our self-expression. That's the connections that we are making online or even offline. That's normal human behavior. And when we look at traditional social media, we create a lot of social capital, but that social capital is actually stuck there in the platform, so you can actually take it with you. And the big difference is that when you are actually spending funds, or like you're interacting with finance, you might spend your funds, but in social capital you actually don't necessarily spend it. It's something you are carrying with your life always. And that's what we are trying to do with Lens Protocol. So we are trying to let the users to secure their social presence and the social graph so that no one can actually rug you out of it. And I think that's valuable because once you own that self-expression and you can publish content, then you can actually have a lot of culture and you can actually have value on that, and actually then maybe even monetize or create different ways where you can capitalize your own value. And that's pretty much what Lens is trying to achieve, and also and create new novel interest graphs, because I think getting adoption, it's not about recreating social. It's about making it as easy as possible to find new use cases, and those new use cases will bring us more towards adoption.
One of my favorite thinkers in the space is Joel Monegro, and the podcast episode we did with him was titled Governance and Capital, where we were trying to understand, why do these governance tokens have value? And his answer was basically like financial capital, like money, the bar that you see in that drop-down menu on Etherscan that tallies up all of your tokens, that's financial capital, right? But then there's also governance capital, which is like the influence to change things. And then what Stani's talking about is social capital. Right? And I think this is one of the pivotal moments that we saw in Ethereum in 2021, where all of a sudden, like the reason why NFTs took off was it was the first step out of pure currency and the first step into a world where it's one part asset, one part community, cloud, flexing, culture, the things that we have in the normal world. And that was all. And so one part of it is an asset, but the other part of it is just like human, something very, very human. And what Stani was talking about with like gas fees and payments is like that actually, the more money that it takes to do something, the more you're pulling away from social capital or all the other expressive forms of capital. So Evin, I want to throw this one to you. What about Web3, cryptography, private keys, public keys, what can that unlock in like human expression, and what kind of other forms of capital might that be able to access or produce that aren't just like a token on a blockchain?
So at Disco, we are really excited about empowering all of you and all of your friends to use the key pairs that you already have at home to be able to take custody of that social capital. You don't need to fund a MetaMask to be able to use the keys to sign messages and receive data written about you. Whether that's you attesting to your own favorite color, receiving a proof that you were here in this room, proofs of employment, where you live, the music that you listen to, all of the data that's not fit for the chain, but still describes you, that you should own and control in a form that you can carry with you to any app or physical experience. So, on the technical side, we already have the tools to be able to carry and own and share, under our consent, all of these different forms of social capital. As Stani was noting earlier, right, there are so many different capabilities that we have when we are in control of the data that describes us. And right now, we are leaving little broken shards of ourselves in every different Web2 application that we use. But instead, we should logically centralize them around ourselves, because we are the multifaceted center of the party. At Disco, we think of all of you just like a disco ball. You are multifaceted. You should reflect your data and your identity to the world however you choose. And that means starting with the ability to control that data and that identity you use to express yourself.
One of the big problems of of the bull market was that Ethereum and ultimately the entire space just turned into like a rich person's game, right? Like gas fees in May of 2021 were like $400 for like a Uniswap trade, which is ridiculous. Like we were all celebrating these monkey pictures that were like $250,000, and that was like the thing that we were all celebrating in the space. That doesn't scale very well.
For us to use our existing keys from Web 2 and Web 3, things like email, PGP, plus Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, sort of every blockchain you can think of, to control private data written about us in the form of signed credentials. So attestations, statements made by one party about another or about itself. So if we have the ability to self-custody verifiable, encrypted information that describes us, describes every facet of our being that we would like to collect and express, that means, one, we don't really have to fill out forms anymore, because when we show up to the front door of an app, we can decide how much information about ourselves we want to disclose. We can have a very personalized experience from the get-go without having to fork over a whole bunch of information to the ownership of that app. But perhaps, more socially, we can discover other. So at Disco, we like to say that we are the purveyors of fine data backpacks. Your wallet is for all of the public financial data that you have, in your tokens, and your data backpack is for all of the rest of the data that describes you, that's useful for you to bring into physical spaces in Web2 apps and in Web3 apps. So, David, I guess to address your question, how can off-chain data more helpfully allow us to find fun and culture? The off-chain data is the container for culture that allows us to be individuals, that allows us to change and evolve and have identities that are not fixed and public and permanent. So we can complement our on-chain expression, our on-chain identity with a much more rich and personalized picture of ourselves, and we can put, our control in the center of all of that.
Yeah, one of the other big narratives in this space that goes against crypto is like, oh, we're financializing everything, but if we take the token out of it, then we're not. So that's kind of cool. And also, Evin, part of your answer was a little bit of curation. And I was talking with the Livepeer team just before coming up here about like, hey, if we hosted like Bankless videos with Livepeer, we could like get out of the shackles of YouTube. The problem with that is that the YouTube algorithm is such an incredible, important point of our business because it is our onboarding funnel. It's our top of the funnel. And it's just the network effects of YouTube that really keep us locked into that platform. So it's great that we could use Livepeer and put it on the Bankless website, but it doesn't do anything for finding new people. And so this brings us to the problem of curation. So if we have like this Livepeer, which is great video infrastructure, how do we also build out systems of curation that allow for discoverability of things that people like? Where do you think about this in the world of lens and just overall in the like non-financial use of Web3?
Yeah, that's actually a good point because it's very hard to compete against traditional social media companies. I previously said that the idea of Lens is to empower something that creates a decentralized Twitter. But for me, that was more of a shitposting and a meme. I really believe that's Twitter, YouTube. They have, like as David said, they have very, very strong network effects, and because it's not decentralized, so users aren't owning actually their own social graphs and their profiles. You can't actually make a digital exit out of one platform and go to another where there's a better algorithm or the platform is aligned more with your values, like for example the tech behind Livepeer. And that's the thing. But what I think about is when you make the threshold very low to actually build new applications and build new algorithms, you see new things happening. And then you see new use cases in interest graphs being built. And I think TikTok is a beautiful example of actually how they didn't really rely on the social graph itself, but the algorithm. So they created an algorithm that actually tries to figure out what you are interested at the moment, at that point. And based on that, actually could create a very big network effect for the creators itself, but also for the users to keep them on the platform. And just very recently, they have been actually starting to work on their social graph part because of the completion of Be Real. So I would say that when you have very low barrier to enter and create these algorithms, and because the users aren't really locked into one particular platform or an algorithm, you start to see movements between the users from one algorithm to another and from one platform to another. But actually, like, the real catalyst is a use case or even an algorithm that basically is way more exciting that we have seen before, regardless whether it's Web 2, Web 3, and like, user behavior doesn't look at the tech, it looks at actually like what you are doing, what your friends are doing. And that could drive actually that movement. And because the users have the choice to choose, you don't need to be locked in a YouTube algorithm. And some of these algos are very good, but they also have, I would say, kind of like objectives. So, if you think about TikTok, for them it's important to make as much as revenue as possible because end of the day it's a platform, and end of the day it's a company behind it. There's shareholders and a board. But algorithms that are open, accessible, and transparent, they might have different kind of objectives, and finding you, discovering content that might be more relevant to you, or align more to your values. So our goal is to just get that threshold very low for developers to build, and also users to move from one application to another, wherever they find exciting things happening. And that's adoption when you actually don't need to, when you're finding new things and we're creating new interest graphs.
Evin, algorithms need data. How can you help?
I'm so glad you asked, David. So, in order to let an algorithm know what it is that you're looking for, to Stani's point, what are you interested in this moment, we need data that can change and evolve like we do. I'm sure, if we were to reflect back on our MySpace profiles from 2008, they might no longer be an accurate depiction of who we are as people. And so if we have independently verifiable data that we can continuously add to, but we can also take away from, that's one of the nice things about verifiable credentials, is they can be revoked, set to expire, you can remove them, sort of a little bit more flexible than some on-chain expression. When we combine our on-chain data with the off-chain data that describes what we've been up to, what we're interested in right now, then we have a pretty complete picture of who we are and what vibes we are looking for. And so from a Disco perspective, if you ping the Disco API, pull someone's public identifier, and they have consented to share parts of themselves, then an application or smart contract can execute logic accordingly. I'm personally very excited about exploring Disco and Lens together so that we can bring both on and off-chain expression, both your public and immutable actions, as well as all the other activities that you do that aren't necessarily encapsulated on screen right now. We refer to this as data exhaust at Disco, so all of the data that you're throwing off going through your adventures across Web 2 and Web 3 in physical space, but doesn't necessarily get captured in a form that's usable to you. And so I simply think that passing signed data via API can feed our applications in a way that is consensual, in a way that is mutually enthusiastic.
So these Web 2 companies run on data, right? Like that is their currency, more or less. It's like the data that we put into it implies where our attention goes, and that's how they monetize these things. They only capture data that's useful for them, and that kind of locks in the internet into whatever data is useful for them is what the internet becomes, and which is a very narrow scope of data. It's things that really just help them monetize their platform. So when we compare Web3 data and the much more granular data, because of how cheap it is with public-private keys, to produce things that might be useful or not, what kind of data expression is unlocked that the Web 2 companies are not allowing us to produce? What kind of new kinds of data might be unlocked by something like Disco?
So I'm really excited about the era of apps doing some data dating in Web3. So inside of an application, as you noted, David, that application is going to generate data relevant to its own operations. But in Web3, with our key pairs, we are able to take custody of that data we're creating inside of the app. And then we're able to carry it with us to another application that can rely on that data. So what this means is that apps can rely upon the data that, that separate apps create. Third-party applications can rely on data that comes from other apps, physically carried to their doorstep by the user that it's written about. And so what this means is that applications can enjoy network effects of shared data when the user is at the center. So some types of data that we're really excited about right now at Disco include credentials of membership in good standing to DAOs, so a little bit more flexible, not necessarily public by default, revocable or can be set to expire, so more flexible than the ability to just buy your way into a DAO with tokens right now. Additionally, things like your proofs of employment, your proofs of residency, your proofs of preferred language, light mode or dark mode for apps, can all provide a remarkable level of personalization without you having to suffer through a whole bunch of drop-down menus. So discoverability and portability will be great benefits for our application ecosystem as well as the end users that enjoy it.
Really quickly before I throw this one back to Stani, Elon Musk's line that stuck with me is that every single user input is an error. How does Disco eliminate user inputs?
So by capturing the data that you create as a function of your actions, you are able to create a pretty complete picture of what you've been up to as opposed to what you are volitionally entering. So if you were to self-describe, or if you were to rather write down a bunch of traits about yourself, they might be more aspirational, they might not be super accurate, whereas if you have a documentation of all the things that you've been up to, that is going to provide a much more holistic picture of who you are. For one more quick Elon hit, he likes to say that those who control the electrons control the world, but I think we are now in a position where we can describe those electrons as data.
I'd love an internet that would just automatically respond to my interests as I navigate it, so I don't have to keep on doing the same things on every single web app that I join.
We think at Disco you should never fill out a form again, and that is why our definition of the metaverse is your ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and receive a personalized experience as a result of the parts of yourself that you choose to share.
Stani, Disco becomes wildly successful. It's put every single bit of useful data into a credential inside of app and it's serving to Lens as an API or any other Web3 app. How does this make Lens or any other Web3 social media app the best social media app of all time? What can you do with all that?
Actually, quite a lot, because I think that data in general and also identity. There's kind of misconceptions about identity that passport is your identity, or let's say social profile, or some sort of other identification. But actually, your identity is all these different data points, and it can be on chain and off chain. And that equals to the identity you have and describes who you are and what you are going to do. And I think in terms of if we are able to get different kinds of data points into the Lens protocol, it really helps to curate algorithms and understand what is interesting for you. But also it allows you to choose what you want to broadcast as data on chain as well. So one of the things I think about is that on-chain data is kind of the same thing as you're wearing your, let's say, outfit or a T-shirt which describes something that you like. I don't know. There's a Guns N' Roses concert here in Bogotá at the moment. So if you see someone with a Guns N' Roses T-shirt, probably they like that band, right? And that's public identity that you have. But inside, you might keep a lot of things that you don't want to get into the public, and that's something that you want to also prove. So I think there's a lot of value with DIDs, but if you do enough chain data, and also figuring out how not to reveal all that data, and also in a way where you can actually prove that you are owner of something specific off-chain that necessarily isn't available in your Web3 footprint. And that way, basically, get more data points. But why this is important is because if you look back now, a couple of years, we create a lot of Web3 data at the moment, and we all have Web3 footprint, right? So who's here? Who has an NFT? Yeah, pretty much everyone.
That was everyone. Nerds.
Who voted on governance? Okay, that's a lot. And anyone got drug pulled ever? Yeah, there are a few people out there. So you have, these are public data points from you. But one thing is interesting is that we keep continuing rewarding people within our community based on what you did on chain, which is interesting, right? But it creates a bit of inequality for people who are coming into the space and they don't have any data. They don't have that Web3 social footprint. And that's where things like what Disco is doing could be very beneficial, but also things like zero-knowledge proofs, where you can actually take that off-chain data and prove different things and get it proved on-chain. So there's sort of things, a lot of interesting tech available, and as I said that as well, that these tools are available. It's more about getting into it and thinking what you could actually build and actually building some cool stuff.
So I opened up this panel shitting on nerds, and then we ended up talking a lot about data and verifiable credentials and a bunch of nerd stuff. So I kind of want to go back to the very beginning as we close this thing out. if all Ethereum does is improve Web 2 and fix finance, that's good. I'm not going to complain about that. But also, I'm here to also fix the rest of the world and just improve. Like, there's one part where we can fix broken stuff, but also there's the other half where we can improve everything else. And so as we close out this opening ceremony, this opening talk, I want to go back to the culture and emphasize the culture, and that means the real world, where we all meet in real life. And so, Evin, can you talk about how everything we've talked about here on stage today can help improve cultural expression, individuality, our relationships with pop stars? Can you talk about how we can fix and have better relationships with, like, Miley Cyrus, or choose your favorite band? How does verifiable credentials and all of this data improve cultural expression in, like, downtown Manhattan, not on Facebook?
Okay, Alpha League, David Hoffman is a Miley Cyrus
I'm
stan.
not.
So
Taylor Swift, though. Yeah.
So I think, Stani mentioned earlier the importance of social capital and the liquidity of that capital, the utility of it. Right now, we do not have a great way to prove that we are the same person who shows up at a Miley Cyrus show, who buys her merch online, who pre-saves her songs on Spotify, follows her on Twitter, subscribes to her email newsletter, shares her content with friends. For each of those different profiles, we are a different person. Some of them might be linked together in various different ways, but there is no way to logically carry all those experiences with you so that when you show up at her show, you can prove that you are in the top 1% of listeners, you own every t-shirt, you have been to every concert in this city, and you have pre-saved every song the day that it was available. But Miley, of course, would love to know all of those things so that she can provide you with a better experience. And other superfans would love to be able to find other people who engage in the same kinds of activities. But right now, we lack the information and the ability to discover one another to make these experiences possible. I like to say that the entire experience of Ethereum happens between your chair and your keyboard. And so that means that the interfaces we use to interact with define our understanding of the underlying protocol. And if those interfaces are not built in a way that has trust cues that we can understand, that makes us feel comfortable and safe interacting with it, and empowered when we're using that data to find new experiences, then we're gonna have a bad time. And we're gonna continue hanging out at the protocol layer, which is a wonderful place, but it is not big enough, or rather is not welcoming enough for all of the millions of people who we have the opportunity to bring into this ecosystem. And so I think if we want to enjoy fun in the metaverse, we need to coordinate around more data than just the money that we have. Your money is, I think, in some ways the least interesting thing about you. And so if we want to bring a more delightful and inclusive and equitable future to the fore, whether that's for Miley Cyrus stans or for people who are not part of the traditional financial system in developing countries, then we need a way to capture more of our self-expression than just our financial power. And that means off-chain verifiable data. That means the ability to bring that data to smart contracts and execute logic on chain. And that means interfaces that were built for human beings, not just for machines.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this. And if you walk away with anything from this panel, is that if you are explaining to your friends and family why they should get into crypto and that the incentive for that is number go up, you're going to delay the bull market by 10 days. But if you can accurately explain to them how crypto is going to enable better culture, you actually bring the bull market forward. So there we go.